Hello everyone, and welcome back to our Get Started Fast with Avid for Final Cut Pro 7 Editors tutorial series. My name is Kevin P McAuliffe, and in this lesson we're going to talk about effects. We're going to talk about the differences in how you apply effects inside of Final Cut Pro 7 and how you apply them inside of Avid's Media Composer. And we're going to talk about something else that goes hand in hand with effects, and of course I'm talking about keyframing. Okay, short introduction. Let's just get into Final Cut Pro 7 and let's get started. Okay, so let's Command and Tab into Final Cut Pro 7, and we're going to need a clip to work with. What I'm going to do is right click, we're just going to import a file, and let's navigate to our footage folder, and I think I'll just take something from my On the Move section of Digital Juice's Video Tracks HD. We'll just grab a clip at random here, doesn't really matter which one. We're going to create a new sequence. I'm going to take the clip, just drag it down, drop it right into the sequence, and there we go. We got a nice shot of the subway here. And inside of Final Cut Pro 7, you will remember that there's essentially two types of effects that you can do. One is what I like to refer to as a clip-based effect, and the other is just a standard visual effect. Now, what exactly is a clip-based effect? Well, a clip-based effect is something like a scale parameter adjustment, a position adjustment, or even adding a drop shadow. Now, why is it called a clip-based effect? Because if I take this clip that's in my timeline right now and I simply double click on it, what's going to happen is it's going to be called up in the viewer right here. Now once it's up in the viewer, you're going to see that we have three tabs up at the top. We have the video tab, which is what we're currently viewing, just the shot. Nothing fancy here. Next we have the filters tab. Right now the filters tab is empty, but we're going to get back to that in just a second. And the last tab we have is the motion tab. Now inside of the motion tab we have the parameters that we can get in and adjust that are attached to this clip. For example, we can adjust the scale, the rotation, the center or the position, the anchor point, crop, distort, opacity, drop shadow, motion blur, and even make speed adjustments right here from within the actual clip itself. So for example, let's say we wanted to do just a very basic push in or a scale adjustment on this shot. How we would do it is very simple. All we would do is, in this case, we'll come right back to the beginning of the timeline, and I'm simply going to add a keyframe right at the top here for scale. Now we're going to get more in-depth in keyframing in a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to add a keyframe here for scale. We're just going to come right down to the end of the clip. I'm going to add another keyframe, and what we're going to do, I just have to actually step back one frame here. We'll add a keyframe. I'm just going to punch in a value of, let's just say 120. You'll see we have that scale adjustment. Now if I come back to the beginning and I simply hit play, you'll see that we have a very slow move that's happening. And at any point, if I want to see how far into the scale I am, I can simply stop, and you'll see I'm now at 109, which is almost halfway through the scale adjustment that we had punched in using the keyframe value. Now, of course, this works the same for rotation. Now, center, of course, is position, anchor point, and etc., etc. Now, what's also important to keep in mind is that these parameters are attached to any clip that I happen to be working with. Now, those clips do include generators. Let me show you what I mean. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down to my generators here. I'm going to come down to text, and I'm just going to create just a very basic text generator. I'm just going to create, sort of a, let's create a lower third for the lower left-hand corner here. I'm just going to use my name, Kevin P McAuliffe, and I am a former FCP7 editor. And what we're going to do is we'll just left justify this here. And we'll just put the size down to be something like, pretty small. Let's just say 24. And if I come back to the video tab, you'll see there we are all the way over there. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this, we'll just drag it down, just drop it right on top, just like such. And we're going to reposition it. And what I can do just for the repositioning purposes is just grab the entire thing, just bring it over like such. And now if I take this generator and I double click on it, of course I not only have now the controls tab to get in and adjust my text and the other parameters that go along with it, but I can jump right down to the motion tab and add things like a drop shadow to this. So you'll see this motion tab is essentially, like I said, attached to any clip that I happen to call up inside of the viewer. Now that's talking about a clip-based effect or a clip-based parameter adjustment, but what about standard effects that you're going to want to apply inside of Final Cut Pro 7? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this title for now, and let's just select our clip. We're going to navigate up to effects, and we're going to come down to video filters, and let's just pick a category here. I'm just going to pick the glow category. Now in most cases what happens is that Final Cut Pro 7 editors come in here, they come down to glow, and they just go and they start applying effects. But what's important to keep in mind is that there's something else going on here under the hood that you might not have been aware of in the past. You're going to notice actually over here in the glow category, we actually have some of the effects bolded and some are not bolded. Well, what exactly do the bold and unbolded effects represent? Well, let's just pick bloom just because it happens to be the first one here, and I'm simply going to select it. Now, as soon as I select it, you're going to see the effect applied over here. What you're also going to notice is that I now have a green bar above my clip in my timeline. I'm just going to undo what I just did. We're going to navigate back up to effects. I'm going to come back down to filters. We're going to come back down to glow. And instead of applying one of the bolded effects, I'm going to apply one of the standard unbolded effects like glow, for example. Now, as soon as I apply glow, you're going to see the glow appears. The only difference this time is I now have a red bar above my timeline. Well, what does that mean? Well, the red bar represents an effect that must be rendered. So if I undo that, I navigate back up to effects, back to video filters, back down here to glow, and I apply bloom. Guess what? The green bar means that this is real time, and I can simply hit the space bar and play it out, just like such. Now, of course, to get in and adjust the parameters of this filter, all we have to do is simply double click on the effect. We can now navigate up to the filters tab, and there are all the parameters associated with the bloom effect that of course we can get in and add keyframes to however we want to. Now, like I said, we're going to get to keyframes in just a second. Now, of course, a major disadvantage that you have inside of Final Cut Pro 7 is the fact that inside of this standard clip-based effects or clip-based parameter adjustments is you really don't have many options in here. You just have the standard one, scale, rotation, etc. In reality, you're really going to want many more parameters at your fingertips. The only problem is that with working this way, you're going to have to keep applying effects on top of themselves to really get all the parameters that you're going to want to have access to. It's not the same in Media Composer. Let me show you how it's going to work there. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to hide out of Final Cut Pro. And of course, let's Command and Tab into Avid's Media Composer. Of course, we want to bring in some clips. So of course, we're going to right click. We're going to AMA link to some clips. Let's head back to my Mac drive, of course, into our footage folder here. And let's just come back down to our on the move clips. And again, we'll just grab a couple at random here. I'll simply say open. And we're going to take one of these clips. Doesn't really matter which one. Sure, why not the train? And let's just put this at the best quality here. There we go. I'm just going to hit T on the keyboard on both Mac and Windows. B to overwrite this into a new timeline. And there is our clip. Now, of course, I know you're thinking to yourself, well, Kev, what clip-based effects do we have or clip-based parameters can we adjust here? None. Not one. Well, you know, you're probably thinking, well, why don't we even have access to one? We have access inside of Media Composer to one tool, one effect, kind of like the one ring that will rule them all. It's one effect that will rule them all. And when you see this effect and you see how well it works over what you were doing previously, you're going to be going to this all the time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command and 8 on the keyboard. Now that's Control and 8 if you happen to switch to a Windows machine. What we're going to do is inside the effects palette, we're going to navigate right down here to the blend category. And the very first effect that we have is 3D warp. Now something I want to point out before I go on, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick a different category here. Let's just see if I can find one here. There we go, perfect. I'm going to choose the image category. Because inside the image category, you're going to notice that we have a lot of little green dots. And then we have a couple of effects that don't have green dots beside them. The green dots represent real-time effects. So anything that doesn't have a little dot beside it means that it's going to need to be rendered before you can play it back in real time. But the great thing is that inside of Blend, of course, 3D Warp is a real-time effect. Now, why is this the one effect that will rule them all? What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take it, drag and drop it right down here onto my shot. Now, we need to step into effects mode. A few ways that we can step into effects mode. You can step into effects mode right here in the Composer window. You can step into effects mode right over here in the timeline. Or for me, I like to use my shortcut, which is Shift and Y on the keyboard. Now, you'll remember that inside of Final Cut Pro, we had access to a few parameters such as scale, rotation, and position. Inside of the 3D Warp tool, we have access to shape, corner pin, corner tracking, crop, scaling, axis, skew, rotation, position, etc., etc., etc. You can see that we have control over so many different parameters inside of the 3D Warp tool. I guarantee you that you're going to be using this effect more than any other effect inside of Media Composer. You'll probably be using this effect at least probably 20 times a day, because it really is the go-to effect for Media Composer editors in their daily work. Now, to do what I just did inside of Final Cut Pro, very simple. All I need to do is simply navigate right back to the beginning of this shot. I'm simply going to add a keyframe right here in the Composer window. We're going to come right down to the end here. Again, we're going to add a keyframe. All I need to do now is simply come back in here to the scaling parameter. I'm simply going to turn it on. We're going to punch in a value of 120. And guess what? If I come back here now, you'll see that our first keyframe starts at 100. All I need to do now is simply hit play, and you'll see that a very slow move is happening on our footage. And of course, at any time I could get in, I could do some rotations, I could do some, corner pinning right here from within the 3D Warp tool. Believe it or not, inside of the 3D Warp tool, you actually have access to 24 different parameters as opposed to the 10 that you had inside of Final Cut Pro 7. Now, I did show you the example of a title inside of Final Cut Pro 7, so I'm going to do the exact same thing here inside of Media Composer 7. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this effect. Let's just hit F5 on the keyboard, which is my shortcut for remove effect. Of course, if you don't have it mapped, no problem. You can find it right here at the top of your timeline. And we're just going to add a new title. Now, of course, the title tool inside of Media Composer is far superior to the text generator inside of Final Cut Pro 7. We'll just do the exact same thing that I did before, Kevin P McAuliffe. And of course, I am a former FCP7 editor. And we're just going to, let's just pick, doesn't even really matter which font. We'll choose American Typewriter. We'll just unbold it. Again, we'll make it about 24. And you know what? Actually, we might need it to be bold here. There we go. Cool. And what's also very cool inside of the title tool, besides being able to add my drop shadows right here and even being able to soften them right here inside the title tool, I can actually get the title tool to give me a preview of what this is going to look like by simply coming up to Object and coming right down here to Preview. And you see I get a very cool looking preview of what this is going to look like when I save it out. So let's just do that. I'm simply going to close the title tool, say save. Let's just call this KPM. I think that's good enough. Now, I don't have the graphics bin open, so I'll just save it into clips, which is fine. And what we're going to do now is simply take it and we're just going to drop it into Video Layer 2. So let's create a new video layer, Command and Y on the keyboard to create that new video layer. Obviously, for any Windows viewers that are watching, that's Control and Y on your keyboard. And let's just edit it in right here. There we go. Now, what's cool is that if we step into effects mode, again, Shift and Y is my shortcut for effects mode, you're going to see that we have access to some of the parameters we had inside of the 3D Warp tool, but not all of them. Well, that's a little bit disappointing, isn't it? It would be disappointing if we couldn't promote this title to be 3D. And we can do that right down here at the bottom by simply clicking on the promote button. And guess what? This title now has all of the parameters that we had inside of the 3D Warp tool available to us right here attached to this title. So I hope you see the differences between how you're going to get in and do effects work inside of Media Composer as opposed to how you're going to do it inside of Final Cut. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close the effects editor here, is I'm going to take that 3D Warp, I'm going to drag it and drop it down, apply it right back to this bottom clip because I want to show you we were talking about real-time effects. I'm just going to apply that effect that we had just done here to our base layer here. We'll just give it, we'll just give it a scale value of 130, it's fine. And what I'm going to do is with this title, we're going to take this title and we're going to copy it into the clipboard and we're just going to paste it right down here and we're going to adjust its position. Let's just put it, I don't know, right over here, let's say. And we're going to do the exact same thing again. Again, select the clip. We're going to copy it to the keyboard, Option and C on the keyboard to copy it up here into the clipboard. We'll sort of drop it in right about there, and what we need to do is we need to make sure that we extend these clips down so they all overlap each other, because I want to show you. We'll just mark that as the out point here, and we'll select all the layers we want to extend down. Here's my shortcut for extend right here, and you see once I click it, I've actually extended all the clips down now, and what I need to do here just with this last one here is we need to just reposition it right about there. Now of course I'm adding keyframes in here, and I just want to have the one keyframe. Perfect. Okay, now, like I said before, we're talking about real-time effects. We'll take a look at this. Technically, now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 real-time effects all on top of each other. I can simply hit play. There's 1, there's 2, here comes 3 right here, here comes 4 real-time effects all on top of each other, all playing back, no rendering required. That just goes to show you the power that you have inside of Media Composer 7 that you'll be able to use on any project you happen to be working on. Okay, so let's hide Media Composer, and I want to Command and Tab back into Final Cut Pro 7 here, because what I want to do is I just want to talk for a little bit about keyframing. So let's just create a new sequence, and we're just going to take our clip, we're going to drag and drop it right down here into our timeline, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to import another clip here. Sure, why not? Doesn't matter which one. And what I want to do with this clip is we'll just take it, and the longer clip we'll actually put on the bottom here, because what we're going to do is we're just going to create a very basic animation. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this shot, we're going to shrink it down and have it move from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen so that you can see how some basic video keyframing will work. So let's do that. All we're going to do is we're going to come right back to the beginning of this clip. Now again, we're going to double click on it here inside of Final Cut Pro 7. We're going to come to the Motion tab. Let's set the scale to be about, I don't know, 30. I think that's pretty good. And what we're going to do is we're just going to position this element outside of the frame over about here, I think. At this point, what we want to do is we want to put a keyframe for the center position, just like such. What we're going to do is we're just going to zoom back a little bit here. Let's just zoom back to 50 just so that I can see our element. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come all the way down to the other end here, and I'm going to step back a frame. Now you'll see the reason that I step back a frame is because if I come right down to the end, we're actually on the next shot, which in this case is nothing, and I don't have access to my scaled down clip here. But as soon as I step back, you'll see it now appears here. And a couple of ways that we can add a keyframe here. What we can do is we can simply navigate right back up to the Add Keyframe or the Insert/Delete Keyframe button. Or what I can do is simply grab the element and drag it over, and as soon as I do that, you'll see that a keyframe is automatically added right over here for the center position in this case. You'll see it's called center, really should be called position, but guess what? We're not going to complain too much about it. Final Cut Pro 7 is a little bit, you know, sort of getting long in the ears here. Okay, so you see that's basically how to do some basic video keyframing. Now, of course, at any point, if I wanted to come down and add another keyframe to this element, all I need to do is simply take this element and grab it and move it wherever I want to, and a keyframe will automatically be added. Now, what's important to keep in mind, you'll see that if I move down a little bit here, we have a very linear move. Basically it moves in, hits that keyframe, sort of bumps, and then comes right back down. You'll see that if I come back and hit play here, here it comes here, moving pretty slow, but that's okay. We're going to get to the point where it bumps right about here, bump, and here it comes down. You know what? As good as that is, I really would rather it sort of be a smooth move. So how do we get in and adjust that? Well, it's actually very simple. All I'm going to do, and let's just move the clip down a little bit just so that it's out of the way of that keyframe. All I'm going to do is head on right on over here to this keyframe. I'm simply going to right click on it, and I can say either linear or ease in and ease out. You'll see that I can now actually take it and adjust it however I want right here in the canvas. Very nice. We'll just come back, hit play. So of course gives us that nice smooth move. Very nice. Okay, so that's really the basics of video keyframing inside of Final Cut Pro 7. So let's talk a little bit about audio keyframing. So to do that, we're going to need an audio clip to work with. So of course what we're going to do is we're going to import an audio clip. I'm just going to hit Command and I on the keyboard. Let's just step back into our footage folder here, and of course I do have a folder called, appropriately enough, music. This is some music tracks from Rampant Design Tools. Let's just take something from Dirty South. I'm just going to take Dirty South, doesn't even really matter which one. Let's just grab a second one here. Go Crazy, I'll just grab the 30-second version, is fine, I'll say okay. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to import, I have a sample VO. So let's get that sample VO here. There it is right there, sample VO. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the sample VO and I'm going to put it onto audio track number 1. Now I don't need both of these, so let's just unlink the audio by simply hitting Option L. And I'm just going to remove one of those tracks. I'm going to come back, I'm going to hit play. This is some very cool motocross footage that we have in our timeline. Now that's okay, it's not motocross footage, but it doesn't really matter for the purposes of what we're doing. I'm simply going to double click on that clip. We're just going to center up the audio here, center pan it, and here we go. This is some very cool motocross footage that we have in our timeline. Okay, now here's the situation we're in. What we want to do is we want to take this Rampant Design Tools music that we imported. We're going to drag it and drop it into our timeline. We want to have that audio dip when we get to our sample VO. This is sort of a perfect example of something you'd be doing inside of one of your edits. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this audio level down. I'm simply going to double click on it to call it up here inside of the viewer. Let's just set the audio to be about -10. And let's come back. We're just going to hit play. That's pretty good. It's peaking at about -10. Now once we get to about here, I'm just going to stop it. Now what we want to do up here inside of the viewer is we're going to add a keyframe just like such. What we're going to do is we're going to come a little bit past the view, and what we're going to do then is we're simply going to double click on the clip again just to update it up here in the viewer. I'm just going to add another keyframe. We're just going to punch in a value of -20. Once I have the audio dipping down, we're going to do the exact same thing towards the end here, and we're just going to add keyframes to have the audio do a little move in and move out. Just like such. Let's not have it go to -40, let's have it go to -10. There we go, very nice. So here we go. Music's playing along, it's gonna dip down right here. This is some very cool nice motocross footage that we have in our timeline. Very cool, there we go. And you can see just by adding basic keyframes inside of Final Cut, we can achieve this effect very, very easily. Now, something I do want to point out here is I'm just gonna grab audio levels 3 and audio levels 4 here. I'm just going to drag them right down like such. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command and 0 on the keyboard. We're going to head to our timeline options, because what I want to make sure of is that I'm showing the keyframe overlays, and I can show audio waveforms if I want. Now the reason I wanted to show you the keyframe overlays is because you'll see I was adding keyframes up here in the viewer, but they're also being added right down here in the actual timeline. So what I can do is simply with the pen tool, grab any one of these keyframes and adjust them however I want. Very cool. Okay, so how do we get in and do the exact same technique inside of Avid's Media Composer? Well, it's very simple. We're going to, of course, Command and Tab into Avid's Media Composer. Let's just create a new timeline here. And of course, what I need to do here is I need to AMA link to my audio. So let's AMA link to. We're just going to step back up here to the footage folder. We're going to come down to our music folder. I'll just take my sample VO here. There we go. We're simply going to say open. We're going to do the exact same thing here. AMA link to a track of music. Again, doesn't really matter which one. Again, this is from Rampant Design Tools. Let's just take Dirty South. Let's just take the same clip. Sure, why not? There we go. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to start with some video clips first. Now, of course, this is not motocross footage, but that's okay for the purposes of what we're doing. We're just going to do exactly what we had just done before. Now, we actually have two clips here. One is 12 seconds, which is good. We'll just select the entire clip. T on the keyboard to select the whole thing. B on the keyboard to edit it into a new timeline. Command and Y to create a new video layer. Remember, by deselecting everything except the layer that we want to edit onto, we're going to auto patch our video or the clip that we're going to edit into onto that layer. Very nice. And let's just take our 5-second clip here. Sure, why not? T on the keyboard again, and we're just going to drop it in right about here. Now let's do some basic video keyframing. Again, what we're going to do, Command and 8 on the keyboard. If you happen to be watching on Windows, that's Control and 8 for all my Windows friends out there. And again, we're going back to our go-to effect, the 3D warp. We're simply going to take it, drag and drop it right down here onto our clip. We're going to step into effects mode by hitting Shift and Y on the keyboard. There we go. Now, one thing that you're going to notice a little bit different inside of Media Composer as opposed to Final Cut is that if we want to zoom back and see more of the canvas inside of Final Cut, you hit Command and minus. A little bit different inside of Media Composer. All we're going to do is just use the magnifying glass just to zoom back just like such. Because we're going to take this clip here, we're going to come up to our scaling. We're just going to turn scaling on. We'll put the scaling at about 30%. Now you'll see that we've taken this clip, we've scaled it down. All I'm going to do now is take it and drag it right over here to position it roughly where we were going to position it inside of Final Cut. Now what's important to keep in mind is that as soon as I make that position change, you'll see a keyframe is automatically added. I'm just going to remove that keyframe because we want to add it right here at the beginning. But here's something that's important to keep in mind by using this Add Keyframe button. I can use this Add Keyframe button, no problem. Everything's, if we weren't really thinking about it, we wouldn't really notice anything that's going on under the hood. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to undo that just for 1 second. I'm going to come back to the effects editor, and I'm going to come down here to the bottom to the Show Hide Keyframe Graphs button. We're going to toggle that on because I want to show you what's actually going on when you click on this Add Keyframe button. As soon as I say Add Keyframe, let's just move this over. What's actually happening is a keyframe is being added for every parameter. When you know what, we don't really need that. That's like overkill. All we want to do is simply adjust the position right here. All I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a keyframe for the X position only, just like that. Now you'll see, of course, it adds the keyframe in here for position, but you'll see it's really only being applied to the X value. All we're going to do now is we're going to come right down to the end. We're simply going to take this element, just drag it right across the screen like such, and you'll see that a keyframe has been added for everything. And of course, if I wanted to remove any of these, all I need to do is simply select one of them, just simply hit the delete key on the keyboard. All we need to do now is simply come back and hit play and take a look at this. There's our element moving across the screen. Now, of course, what we can do, much like what we did inside of Final Cut Pro, is I can hit Shift and Y on the keyboard, and what you would think that I would be able to do at this point is simply grab the element and drag it up like such. The only problem is you'll notice that nothing has really changed. The X value still moves the clip right across the screen. Why is that? Well, remember, I was only adding keyframes for the X parameter. What we're going to want to do if we want to actually make a Y adjustment is we're going to want to add Y keyframes in here as well. It's actually very simple to do. I'll just add a keyframe for Y. Again, come right down to the end here, and let's just do the exact same thing. Add keyframe. So now if I come to the middle, we grab our element. I can now just position it right up here like such, and you'll see that we now again have that very rigid move. It's going to come right up there and it's going to bounce, kind of like it's hit that invisible wall. So how do we get in and adjust that keyframe and make it smooth as well? Well, it's pretty much the same as we did in Final Cut. The only difference in this case is we're going to come right over here into the effects editor. I'm going to come to the Y parameter. We don't actually need the Z parameter, so let's just delete it. All I'm going to do is simply right click on we'll select the Y keyframe right here. I'm going to right click on it. You'll see right down here I do have the option to get in and make this keyframe shelf, linear, spline, or Bezier, and you'll see that if I switch it over to Bezier, you'll see that we get now the curves on everything. And of course, this is where people run into a little bit of a problem, because they say, well, okay, how do I get in and actually adjust the curves? Because right now you'll see it eases in, and then it eases in here, and then it eases out, but I don't want it to do that. I only want it to sort of do its little ease right here at this keyframe. So how do we get in and adjust this? Because I don't have access to the spline handles here. So what we do is actually very simple. We're going to navigate right back over here, because you'll remember when I actually activated this view, it says show hide keyframe graphs. But I don't actually see any graphs. I wonder where these graphs are hidden. Well, the graphs are actually hidden, if you want to call them that. Right here, you'll notice that we have a little twirl down that I can twirl down just like such, and take a look at what I now have access to. I can now come in and adjust the interpolation of this keyframe so that it does exactly what I want it to do. Take a look at this. There we go. Oops, let's make sure I don't actually click on anything. There we go. Nice smooth move at the top, straight out at the end. Very nice. And of course we can get in and adjust as many keyframes or add as many keyframes in there as we want and have that animation really do anything that we need it to do. Okay, let's move on and let's talk a little bit about audio keyframing now. Okay, so let's just create a new sequence here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our sample VO, and I don't need both tracks of my sample VO, just one. And in this case, we're not going to edit in a video layer. I'm just going to go with just audio for the purposes of what we're doing. And we are going to need 3 audio tracks. We're actually going to put in 4 audio tracks. So let's actually just add 2 audio tracks here. I just like to keep things organized with left and right. I have all my left channels on odd, right channels on even. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this VO, and I'm simply just going to drop it in by hitting B on the keyboard. Now let's get our music right here, and again, same thing, T on the keyboard, and what we're going to do is I'm just going to put the music on 3 and 4. Now, when I edit, I like to have my audio laid out in a very specific way. I normally have narration on 1 and 2. Now, narration could be narration, and if there's some sort of a different alternate voice track, I normally have them on channels 1 and 2. On 3 and 4, I'll have any on-camera dialogue, anything that comes off a camera, that audio I'll put onto 3 and 4. I'll put effects on 5 and 6, and I'll put music on 7 and 8. Now, obviously, things might overlap from time to time, but I generally like to stick with that. Now, that's only my own personal preference. I stick with that, so if I ever get a call from an editor looking for, music in my piece, I can say, you know what? It's at about the 20-minute mark on tracks 7 and 8. I always know exactly what tracks my audio happens to be on. Obviously, you can work however you want. I just like to give you sort of the guidelines as to how I like to work, because they haven't steered me wrong yet. Okay, so let's take our Rampant Design Tools music, again T on the keyboard just to mark the whole clip, and let's just edit everything of this clip in. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that again, this music is going to be super loud, so what we want to do is I'm going to hit F3 on the keyboard to call up the audio mixer. Now, if you don't have it mapped to your keyboard, no problem. You can simply navigate up to Tools and find the audio mixer located right here. All I want to do is I want to bring my music right now down to -10. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to group these two elements together. Now you might hear me refer to that function as gang, because it used to be called gang, and I happen to just keep calling it that just because of force of habit, but it is actually referred to as group. And all I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take these and I'm going to put them at -10. Now this is actually kind of handy that I did this the way that I did this, because when I drop the audio in, you're going to notice that Media Composer has midden both of these channels. It's center pan both these channels, which I do not want, because my music's not mono. I actually have discrete left and discrete right that makes up a stereo pair. So why is it doing that? Well, it's doing that because there's actually a setting set telling it to do that. What I'm going to do is inside of my settings, I'm going to come into the audio setting, and you're going to see right now the default pan for mono tracks is centered. I don't want that. I want them to be alternating left and right, and as soon as I adjust that, you'll see that my audio channels immediately pan left and right. Now we've made the audio -10, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my segment mode, lift override. I'm just going to drag my VO down to about here, and I'm just going to come back and hit play. So obviously the music is going to completely bury the voiceover, and of course the voiceover is only on the left channel, so let's adjust that. The voiceover is on channel 1. Let's simply navigate over here to channel 1. I'm simply going to select L being 100, and I'm simply going to punch in a value of 0 and hit enter, and it's going to mid that channel. So what I can do is just solo it, and you'll hear now
this is some very cool motocross footage
that the audio is panned center. Okay, so how do we get in and do that keyframe mixing that you saw inside of Final Cut Pro 7? Well, it's actually very easy, but before I do that, I want to set up a couple of audio views. Now this audio view is normally how I like to work. I like to call it my normal view. So what I'm going to do down here at the bottom is I'm going to set up this timeline view as normal. I actually have it already set to normal, but what I'm going to do is just make sure that it's set to normal, and we're just going to override it. I'm going to say call it normal. We'll say replace. There we go. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to take channels 3 and 4, and I could actually do this to all the channels if I wanted to, but for right now, for the purposes of what we're doing, because we're only going to be worrying about the audio on channels 3 and 4, I'm going to take these channels and I'm going to make them a lot bigger. I'm going to hit Command and L on the keyboard, and you'll see that it's only actually adjusting the channels that I have selected. Now I have timecode selected, and that's okay for the purposes of what we're doing, because obviously we could adjust this if we were doing this for real. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I'm happy with this track, sort of the size that it is right now. What I want to do now is I want to actually add some information to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down to the fast menu. I'm going to come up to audio data, and I'm simply going to turn the volume on. Now as soon as I turn the volume on, you can see where 0 is. You can see +3, +6, +9, +12, -3, etc., etc. Now as soon as I've done this, I'm going to call this my audio mixing view. So you'll see down here at the bottom, this view has now been updated to be called normal 1. What I want to do is I'm just going to call this audio mixing. And you'll see that I can switch back and forth between my two views simply with a click of the mouse. Very cool. Now you'll remember inside of Media Composer we do have a keyboard shortcut for keyframing. Now in this case we don't see it because we don't have it mapped to the Composer window, but I can tell you for a fact that if I actually navigate right back to about here, what I can do is simply hit the apostrophe key or the quotes key right beside the return on the keyboard, and that's going to add a keyframe for me. All I need to do now is simply navigate right down to about here, I think. I'm just going to add another one, and all I have to do now is simply grab my keyframe, and I can adjust it however I want. Now the question is, how do I know exactly how much I'm adjusting it? Well, if you take a look right down here where it says audio mixing, as I grab the keyframe and move it, it's actually telling me what dB the audio is at. Very cool. And you'll see that what I can also do if I wanted to is I can actually hold Command on the keyboard, and I'm actually going to jump down or jump up by -3, -7, -11, -15. You'll take a look, you see it's actually jumping by those preset values. Very cool. Now of course I am only adjusting one of those keyframes, so what I can do is I can simply put this back up here at 0. All I have to do is simply select both keyframes, and I can move them, of course, together. Oh, you know what? I just realized something. This actually starts a little bit too early. I want it to start a little bit later. So what I want to do is I want to adjust these 4 keyframes. I just want to slide them down my timeline a little bit. So how do I go about doing that? all I'm going to do is simply hold Option on the keyboard, and what's going to happen is that Media Composer is basically going to take these keyframe values and slide them exactly the way they are. You'll notice that my audio right now is still at 0, sliding down my timeline. And everything is moving in sync with each other. Now what's important to keep in mind, you'll see that if I actually come down here to this keyframe, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to deselect all the keyframes here just by holding Shift on the keyboard. What's important to keep in mind is that you'll remember that I set the audio here to be -10, so any adjustments that I'm making in here with these keyframes is relative to this -10. So if I take this keyframe here and I drag it down another -10 dB, we're actually going to be at -20 dB, because this keyframe, even though we're at 0, still represents the change we made here down to -10. So that's something important to keep in mind. In most cases, when you import music from a CD or something like that, it's going to peak way up at 0. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to bring those levels right down to about -10 in the mixer before you start doing any serious mixing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down to about here. We're going to add another keyframe just like such. I'll add another keyframe right there, and let's just bring both of these right up to 0 here. There we go. And what we should have now, if I come back and hit play, I'm just going to turn solo off here.
This is some very cool motocross
It's a very cool mix
that we have in our timeline.
That was done very quickly and very easily, simply by getting in and keyframing. And of course, when I'm done and I'm happy with the way that my mix has now turned out, all I need to do is simply navigate right back down here to the bottom and simply switch my audio mixing view back to my normal view, and I'm now ready to continue on with any other editing tasks that might need to be done. So if you want to get post-production workflow tutorials and industry insight you need to bring great stories to life, head on over and check us out at avidblogs.com/post.